when Russia was trying to do all these false flag attacks, and they were being debunked in real time with evidence. And I think that's where OSINT by the public can absolutely shine, because the credibility of like a random Twitter account saying, I've geolocated this to here, that's actually a lot higher than if the New York Times says, officials who have asked to remain anonymous because they're not authorized to speak to the press have said that, we've geolocated that as a false flag attack. That has no credibility compared to a JPEG with some colored squares on it.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm Carson, the host for the episode, and it's going to be another exciting show today. As always, we're looking to bring really, great leaders, people with amazing opinions and ideas to really make the world a safer place, really kind of highlight what we need to be doing in the security industry. So today, I'm actually joined with Thaddeus the Grugq. Is that how I pronounce it properly? the Grugq?
It's close enough. Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah.
So, but it's a pleasure to have you here. You want to give the guests a little bit of background of what you do, how you get into the industry, and what things you get up to. What's the fun things you find in the security industry that's entertaining and educational?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm the Grugq. I basically started doing InfoSec stuff in 1998. So that's a very, very long time now. And yeah, in that time, I started out working at enterprises doing, firewall stuff, then immediately went into doing offensive security, did some startups, did consulting. Sort of along that time, I've always been very interested in, I guess now we call it deviant security. So sort of the secure side of offensive security. Right. So how do hackers protect themselves, or how do you do stealth when you're on an operation? That always interested me. And then in the last decade plus, I've gotten more interested in the broader sort of things, which the sort of strategic operational issues. If you are a nation state, how do you use cyber to achieve your aims? Like if you have goals that you want to achieve, you have cyber, how do you get from A to B? So that started interesting me, and that's really what I've been focusing on sort of more and more heavily now, to the exclusion of pretty much everything else. And
absolutely.
I absolutely love it. I think it's fascinating and it's great.
It's an interesting, absolutely. It's a really interesting industry. Absolutely. I think it's always changing and evolving and exciting. There's, it's not one thing that, it stands still. It's the technology evolves, the threat changes. So it's always something that it's always continuous learning. And one of the things you mentioned is about absolutely nation states from a strategic, how do they make sure that they're doing cyber to their advantage, sometimes in an ethical way, in a legal way,
right.
That they can actually empower their citizens and country to move forward. And I've always found it, we're in a world we're in, no country can do this alone. In many cases, it's very difficult to do it in a silo, and it's always about finding good cooperation. So what's some of the things that you think? What's some of the areas that countries are looking to get into in this? Because every country seems to be some places are taking very different approaches.
Right.
Some countries are adopting, for example, some countries will allow they permit the ability to go and do offensive attacks, in response to being a victim. Some countries are against it. Some countries are doing it, in stealth, where they don't want it to be known. Where's the base, and where's the majority that's really taking this?
Right. So there's a whole bunch of interesting things going on. So the US is they've developed this theory called persistent engagement, which is essentially based on the idea of assuming that you're an 800-pound gorilla. How do you get what you want? And that's fairly easy if you're an 800-pound gorilla, right? Now the problem is, if you are not an 800-pound gorilla, that's not necessarily the same, like that strategy is not going to work for you. So the UK just yesterday, or just the other day, put out a doctrine of how they're looking at. It's complementing the US, right? They looked at like what is the value that the US brings, what is the value that we can bring, right? Like you could be the small version of the US that does it worse and cheaper, or you could do your own thing. And they've done their own thing. I think it's really quite good. I'm going to be looking a lot more at that in the future. I think it's very, very good stuff. But then, you have, on the other hand, places like Germany, which are, like they've got a lot of talent. They have, they've got like the legal frameworks and the structures and stuff in place, but the sort of political will isn't really there. And it doesn't gel, like it doesn't coalesce. So I don't know what's keeping them back, but there's that. Then, France is pretty good, but, they could be better. There's all this stuff like the Dutch, they punch way above their weight. They've somehow managed to harness the talent that they have. They're a small country. They don't have the same resources as, other people. They're not part of the Five Eyes Alliance. They're part of an alliance, but not specifically Five Eyes. So with all of that, they've still managed to do remarkably well. Like they're just really good at the cyber that they do. Australia sort of carved out a niche as well, in that their risk appetite allows for a bit more sort of offensive stuff by the state, as long as it's sort of, if it's protecting citizens, then it's okay to be aggressive overseas. The UK, they don't have that same risk appetite. Then we have India, which is, to me, it's really, like here no one's ever going to say that the Indians are bad at IT, right? Like you don't look at it and be like, well, of course they don't have good cyber. They don't have any good, technical people. That's just not true. But somehow they don't have good cyber, and I don't know what that is. And it's not necessarily for lack of, a legal framework. It's not for lack of talent. It must be political will or something. So that like there's so much that goes into having an effective force. As you said, like there's the legal stuff where, you have to be ethical and within the bounds of, if you're a liberal democracy, you have certain values and you want to make sure that you follow those. Obviously Russia and China have their own things going on. So they've got strong cyber, and because they're authoritarian, their legal frameworks, they're not our legal frameworks, shall we say.
They are actually sometimes very conflicting in regards to what we agree with, would see as the international norms, I would say. They're very conflicting approaches where it's in some cases it's fine to carry out criminal activities as long as it's not against our own citizens, and right. Would give they would actually give a pass and provide safe havens, but when they need them, I call them almost like the cyber mercenaries. When they need their help, they'll call for the help, and they had to be at hand to carry out more direct instructions. As long as they're given that pass, so it's very different kind of where everyone has to abide by the laws, where there's a lot of exceptions in certain countries.
Absolutely, and China is similar in that they have a lot of companies that provide they will get work farmed out to them, right? So when I think it was in 2021, there was that exchange bug that came out in January or so.
Yes.
And so that was farmed out, like JD Work, a friend of mine, was calling it a land grab, right? Like you have this, you've got a bug, you've got all of these things are vulnerable, but you only have, this short window of time. And so you need to get as many of them before anyone else does, before they get patched and before someone else does. So they just farmed it out to basically companies that do offensive cyber for hire for the government. And it's, that's not a thing that exists in the West, really.
Absolutely, yeah. Not in the same way.
Right.
They have contracts which they have to abide by the contracts. There's a little bit of different,
Yeah.
a different way of doing it, but it's,
Yeah.
the legal terms is definitely where we all have to adhere to the same legal framework. And those countries that,
Right.
they get that pass. And it was interesting you mentioned earlier about India. I completely agree.
Hmm.
India has an amazing talent. The talent pool
Absolutely.
from pen testers and really passionate
Hmm.
people. I think one of the things is, when you talk about the political will and accepting, to take some of the risk,
Hmm.
I think it sometimes comes down to having a central coordination,
Right.
having where you've got transparency, you've got coordination, you've got, different, government agencies sometimes working together,
Hmm.
and also sometimes in each country, it depends where cyber sits.
Yeah.
In the US, they've got the Cyber Command and they've got CISO, and they all have their different
Mm.
functions. In the UK, you've got GSEQ, and then you've got the National Cybersecurity Center. So they have, these
Yeah.
different coordinations where they're responsible for different areas, but they cooperate really well together. The countries where I
Yeah.
see sometimes that struggle is those where cyber
Mm.
maybe sit into the defense or military side, where it just becomes a very
Yeah.
military extension, and not really looking, because in the end, it does go beyond.
Hmm.
It has a different elements of it. Whether it's into intelligence gathering, whether it's into
Hmm.
criminal activities that targets the citizens, whether
Hmm.
it's targeting critical infrastructure, and identifying weaknesses. So sometimes it depends really where the country's strategy is, where cyber sits in that overall government area, and
Right.
that central cooperation of working together.
Yeah, very much so. And I think and another part of it as well is sort of what are I'm not going to say like the
Mm.
authorities, because that's very American, but sort of what is the remit, like what is the remit of the intelligence services? What are they supposed to
Mm.
do?
Yep.
Like, so if you've got like the SIS and they're supposed to go out and do foreign intelligence that I believe it's not just collecting information, but it's promoting the foreign policies of the UK. Right? It's sort
Yep.
of this active, they see covert activities and covert operations as part of their thing, and it's all external, and so they have no hands internal, and that gives you one sort of risk appetite, and you expect a certain sort of
Hmm.
cyber to come out of that, right? Whereas if you've
Yep.
got a domestic law enforcement agency, obviously they have a completely different approach to
Hmm.
cyber. And like you need all of these, right? Like
Yep.
that's the great thing about cyber is you can't just do one, right? Like it's
It's all has to be coordinated together, and everybody has to have
right.
some type of, at least, transparency and information sharing is really important. And that brings up an
Mhm.
important topic. I think one of the things I really enjoyed the talk that you did last year in Talon B-Sides, and that really
Yeah.
kind of brought up, it got my mindset, when a lot of countries are doing open source intelligence gathering. And
Mhm.
and it's also been done in society as well. Society is also participating in a lot of the social media platforms. I
Mhm.
think it really triggered a thought in my mind, was around, well, when open source intelligence is good, when does it work? How is it be helpful? And not just from a government perspective, but how
Mhm.
citizens can be involved, and how sometimes those let's say the motives, or the results can be very conflicting. And when is open
Mhm.
source intelligence bad? But before we get into the details, what can you explain to the audience, in your mind, what is open source intelligence? What is the method and technique, and how do
Mhm.
governments take advantage of it today?
Right. So historically, okay, basically, open source intelligence is intelligent, like the intelligence process where you collect information, you analyze it, and you extract intelligence. Right. Intelligence is the result of analyzing data. Raw
Hmm.
data is not intelligence. So that's sort of an important step that's involved, that analysis phase.
Hmm.
Historically, open source intelligence meant things like newspapers, brochures, magazines. If you were Sweden and you were doing open source intelligence on like the Germany's tank production or whatever,
Hmm.
you would call up, say, Rheinmetall or whomever it was, and say, "Hi, can you give us the sales brochure for your current tank?"
Hmm.
And then you would collect that, and that would be sort of everything that you knew about Germany's tank production would be based on maybe job ads in the local papers,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. The
Yep.
internet has blown that up. It's completely blown that
So
up.
accelerated, but with both real, accurate information and misinformation.
Right.
Now it's a case of, you have to then decipher what is factual and what's not factual as well.
Right. And there's just been like some other amazing things, like satellite imagery that's down to 1 meter per pixel, which is not even the good stuff. Like that was high end government super secrets technology, a few decades ago, and now it's $20 per square kilometer or something like that. And you can get it for free if you want as well. It's just amazing. So the sources for open source intelligence have exploded. Everything now from database leaks, which it's we could call it a gray area, but the fact is, once it's out in the open and you're collecting intelligence,
I've had my hand slapped a few times for connecting specific databases to each other, and that was referred to as creating a new. And they kind of the way it was referred to me was it was creating a new breach by having an index of multiple data sources together. So I've had my hands slapped a few times. I'm told not to go down that path. Don't do that.
Right. So I'm not advocating any illegal activity, of course, but hypothetically, there are we can say that there are people out there who are a little bit closer to the line.
Yes.
And and when Bellingcat, for example, actually purchases databases from Russia that they then use, and I think that blurs the open, like open source, where you go out and you specifically collect from data brokers, like so one of the ones I had was from Belarus, and I know that what happened was that the cyber partisans had hacked the Belarus, like they've just hacked everything, but they took the database from immigration that had passports going across, the passport numbers of people across borders, and they gave that over to Bellingcat, and that was used to expose Russian illegals, right, where they were able to match up passports and names to trips that went to Moscow and all this stuff. And it's open source in that it's sort of public in how you've gotten it, but it's a bit closer to like
yes. It's one of those areas that it can highlight a lot of really interesting kind of data once you correlate it with other things. It's really absolutely, and I thought even the Bellingcat book was fantastic. The recent book that they released was really insightful into a lot of the techniques and a lot of the risks that people took as well in getting it, that ultimately highlighted it's we're operating in that gray area where it actually highlights a lot of even war crimes and criminal activities, and it's some people take a lot of risks in order to get ultimately justification of bringing other serious crimes to closure, because sometimes that's that's what people, that's the motivations, is bringing closure to some serious catastrophic events.
Right, and I think that's one of the interesting differences between, as you were saying, the public open source, like public OSINT versus, well, I guess the government is also public OSINT in a way. Yeah. So the private OSINT that's done in the public, and the public OSINT that's done in private. But anyway, the difference there is sort of the intent and the motivation, right? So you've got when the government is doing it, it's sort of a lot of time it's not even so that they can act, it's just so that they could know what's going on and decide if they need to act later on, right? So they may know things and they don't see why it's there, why they should do anything about it, right? It's it's worth knowing, and they like knowing the truth, but they're not going to prosecute someone, or they're not going to start an international incident, so they're done. Whereas for the public, a lot of the time it's very different, right? Like we care about, when in Lebanon, when there's a gigantic explosion, we think that there's a reasonable, there's public interest in exposing all of that. Even if nothing ultimately happens, which seems to be the case now, unfortunately. But there's value in just having the truth out there, that transparency, and that's transparency is not always a thing that governments are super inclined towards.
It comes down to that's one of the things being based in Estonia. That's one thing I really enjoy about the society and state here, is that the government is doing everything it possibly can. They see themselves as a service provider, so they're being transparent as much as they possibly can to the citizens. But not all governments operate that way. Not all governments want, and not all citizens want it as well. Not all citizens want that transparency. They just want to be able to live their lives and not have to worry about some of the ways that governments operate.
Right. So the Estonians are the ones, I believe, who put out a yearly intelligence summary. Like their intelligence agency writes up this booklet that they put out in.
I have a bunch of them behind me here.
I read them every. As soon as they come out, I sit down and read them. It's great. Obviously they're limited in what they can say. But it's always so amazing when they're like, and here is someone who worked for the KGB, and then he started working for us, and then he was contacted by one of his ex-neighbors, and it's just, wow, I love all that stuff. It's great.
It's really one of the things I also like, where they actually have coordinated it and aligned the increase in certain types of attacks to political events and news information or elections and moving of statue, how they coordinate all of that and show here's the spike when we made this decision, and here's the types of attacks that happened, and here's what the origin. It's really insightful, because it really shows you a lot of the methodologies and the techniques that are used. One is to whether it's sometimes, again, it's those let's say the hacktivism. So you do get hacktivism happening, but in a lot of cases you also can relate it back to government operations as well.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that a lot of, basically, I think other agencies should do this. I think that there's no reason that, CIA and SIS and GC, this sort of information is great. It highlights, operations that have been successful. It reveals some of what happens behind the curtain, and not in a, here are our secrets, but more like, we are a government agency staffed by civil servants who we have to work 9 to 5, and we have holidays, and we're doing a job. We're not some weird, scary, fly by night, shadowy organization. It's,
and it's interesting as well. I do like, Europol has also taken a big step in doing this as well, where they recently, they're more proactive in releasing some of the campaigns that they've done. What was the last one? Was the Cookie Monster campaign, which was taken down. I think it was the Genesis Marketplace. And CISA in the US has also taken a very proactive approach as well, where they're now trying to release information enough ahead of time so people can take informed decisions about protecting themselves. So there is those elements, and I think it's fantastic, because I think for me transparency is so critical, because when it allows you to make informed decisions versus not knowing. Means that either you don't know that your data's compromised and your systems are compromised, or that they're vulnerable. So it's really important to be able to get that proactive steps and make the decisions sometimes yourself.
Yeah, and I think it's particularly useful for, we talk about the security poverty line and stuff like that. If you have your dedicated security officers who work, or your security staff, you're probably a lot more aware of what's happening than the majority of places who just don't have anyone. They've got your friend's kid who comes in, every week, or not even, he came in that one time, he set up the computers, and now it just works.
The guy or girl who actually came in and knows a bit about computers, help me set up your business.
Right.
And there's so many businesses, there's the hair salons, there's the mechanics, there's the paint shops that they don't have those dedicated staff, and those are the ones, I've seen people's businesses where it was a family business, and all of a sudden they become a victim of ransomware. And it's not just the business, it's their entire digital life. 25 years of all pictures and family photographs, all basically encrypted. And you're just in that situation where you're trying to determine, okay, how do you help them? How do you get their lives back? Because it's not just a business. It's pictures of family members who may have passed away 10 years ago, and that's the only evidence you've got that they ever existed. And it's tough for people. And to your point is, majority of businesses are a lot of those types of business where they have that one person who, they rely on for being, not just the tech person, but also the security person.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, to me, I always find that so fascinating, because it's like the world that I live in is it's security stuff, right? Like I have a lot of different laptops because I isolate by what I'm doing with them, right? So I've got, I'm going to school, so I have a school laptop, and I'm, doing a report for someone, so I have my consulting laptop, and here I'm on my podcasting and access to the internet laptop, and so like talking with people who have like the computer, and it also it's got their games, and they look at porn, and they run their business, and it's all on the same thing. And to me, I have a heart attack. But
it can be quite scary. It's a scary thought sometimes, and it comes down to since we come from that same background, very security minded and everything we do. But ultimately, I always find it's the society around us that is what makes us secure as well. Is I can take a lot of the procedures and measures to reduce the risk as much as I can, but ultimately that's the society, the people you interact with, the people who have your contact details on their devices. If they become breached, what can you do? It's
right. So and they don't even need to be breached. They just need to have they just need to install an app from an app store anywhere, and like all of our contact details have been scraped since the dawn of the iPhone, essentially. It's too late now. There's no getting it back. It's gone. But,
we have to operate as knowing that it's out there, and then it comes down to knowing what can that data be used for. Is what's the potential of abuse of that data, and that's what we have to start monitoring. That's where we have to start being proactive in is looking about when that data is being abused. And how to be notified, and it's a very challenging. To your point is absolutely right. Is the data's out there, and every government has access to it, and it comes down to even criminal organizations have access to it. So now it's a case of how do we make sure to limit its impact and abuse.
Exactly, and so that's an important point actually that I would bring up, which is that a lot of security, it's less about not getting hacked or breached. It's more about impact containment, right? It's, a bad thing is going to happen. How do I make sure that it has the least impactful damage possible? Trying to structure things, and as I was saying, I've got a lot of different laptops. That's because I assume they're going to get hacked. So if the one that I do, work that I think is sensitive on gets hacked, that's bad. But I treat that a lot more securely than the one that I, do this sort of thing, or where I do Twitter and everything on. And it's because if those get hacked, then at least the things that I treat more sensitively are not exposed. And that's impact containment. And that's the, the compartmentalization of things. And it's very expensive, not in terms of, buying laptops is expensive, but it's just, it takes time and it takes effort.
Time consuming. Absolutely.
Right.
It's
and you get lazy, and it's like, do I really want to get up and go and turn on the other laptop, or I'll just do it here once quickly. It won't be a problem just one time,
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And it's a process that I do personally as well. And it's not just about, also containing the impact, but it's also about resiliency as well. I know that I even it's ridiculous for me. I've got so many email aliases that I actually, to the point where that when I see something being targeted with phishing, I can almost identify the origin of which organization where I use that email to subscribe to the point where because I have broken it into, to your point, is impact emails. It's one for communication, one for subscribing, one for traveling, and it's that containerization where I got to the point where when I see all of a sudden something coming through, I'm like, that's interesting, because only these types of places have I actually used that email address on, and it really allows you to start kind of knowing where some of the risks are as well. But it also means that if those emails are ever compromised, the impact to them is very limited or very isolated.
Absolutely. So I have a similar approach, and I detected a phishing email because like it was quite good, and I was reading through it, and I was like, something is slightly off. So I took a few minutes, and when I looked at it again, I suddenly like, wait a minute, this is the personal email address I use for friends. My bank doesn't know this. Like, there's no way my bank could email this address because I use a different one with them.
Yep.
Something is wrong. And that was, it's not the sort of thing that normal people do, unfortunately. Yep. And I don't know.
And they're getting very difficult to tell the authenticate, how authentic they are looking. I've seen some that, I really thought the recent phishing campaigns that show that, there's suspicious activity in your account, log-on attempts coming from, Moscow, and people will be like, whoa, they'll click on links and try to log on to see what these activities are. But ultimately, right. that's the phishing campaign itself is to scare you and to get you to click on it, rather than you seeing it and then going, well, let me go and log into the place that I typically log into. And check it from there and seeing if I'm getting alarms. Where some people might not have that mindset. They all of a sudden they get it's that fear, and they know that sometimes time is sensitive, and they have to respond very quickly.
Right. Well, that's behind quite a lot of phishing attacks. It's just that if you same with the Indian call center scams, where they'll say like you've bought Norton, and if you want a refund you have to call us. And people are like, why am I getting charged? Like, I don't want to get charged $600. I better call for a refund. And then they keep this time pressure on, so you don't have time to think. So that might be one of the big takeaways.
Financial fear. The financial fear. So one of the questions I've got for you as well. Take I always say the 30-second pause. Just take a 30 seconds, sit back and think about, is this something I was expecting? Is this something that I have I seen it before? Is this the first time I've seen it? And do I know the original source? Am I banking with that bank? It's just going through that. Just a ticket of pause.
If you're panicking, it's probably induced. Like there's almost nothing that has to be solved this exact second that you're going to find out by email, and that's basically not going to happen. Try not to panic.
Absolutely. It's always that 30-second time can make a big difference. Yeah. So I've got a question for you. One of the things, I've seen a lot of times where, if you get into, even looking and reading the Bellingcat book, and a lot of those, the great ways that's showing how open source intelligence has been really successful. Is there any cases that you see that, where it's been bad? When open source intelligence can go wrong? Because I think there's the good and bad. There's the good about getting transparency and finding the truth, where open source intelligence can also cause problems, whether it being political or whether for example, I think closing the door for real intelligence gathering. Sometimes the hacktivists and those who are just trying to help, but sometimes are causing challenges for the real intelligence gathering. What do you see that when can OSINT go bad?
Right. So just before that, I'd quickly say one of the ways that OSINT did really well, I think, was in February of 22, when Russia was trying to do all these false flag attacks, and they were being debunked in real time with evidence. And I think that's where OSINT by the public can absolutely shine, because the credibility of like a random Twitter account saying, I've geolocated this to here, that's actually a lot higher than if the New York Times says, officials who have asked to remain anonymous because they're not authorized to speak to the press have said that, we've geolocated that as a false flag attack. That has no credibility compared to a JPEG with some colored squares on it by,
and that's
random.
I've seen it. That's impressive. The speed. I always love, even on Twitter, I like the OSINT challenges. I like, here's a picture, a random picture. Where am I? And I love those. And then
Yeah.
for me, the speed. Some people, I'm just like, whoa, how
Then it,
how do you
it's
have access to
amazing.
that? So,
Yeah,
but
they're so good. Yeah. So there's that, but I think the area where the sort of public participation in intelligence collection,
mm,
it can go very wrong when there's something sort of active that's happening, and it's not even a case of like too many cooks spoil the broth or
mhm,
anything. It's very much that if a service is trying to do a set of operations. So, for
mhm,
example, if Britannia invaded Yugoslav,
mhm,
and Yugoslav was, very interested in knowing what was going on in Britannia. But then
mhm.
everyone was like, "Hey, let's go hack Britannia because they're doing a bad thing." Um, Yugoslav would be fucked, right? They would be screwed over
Yep,
because all of their operations are now being stomped on by randos who have got no connection to them at all.
yep.
Um, who, if there's a lot of public notice of this as well, like if there's a lot of media attention of, like everyone's participating, they're all hacking, this is great.
Mhm.
The people getting hacked are going to increase their security because people are yelling at them, "Hey, we're coming to hack you." That tends to be a good motivator to become more secure. And
Mhm.
so, that random example pulled out of nowhere that has no relation to events that may or may not have happened in the last year. Um, that's a real problem. If there are people basically getting involved and telling everyone that they're getting involved,
Mhm.
you're alerting you're alerting the people that should be kept in the dark as much as possible. And
Absolutely.
anything that you do can't actually be exploited by the people that need to exploit it, right? Like if you conduct an operation, you steal a bunch of data and then you leak it publicly, a huge amount of value that had is now lost because for a
Because
number
now
of reasons.
they're closing the door. They're changing the
Right.
information in real time. They're trying to mitigate that impact of that data
Exactly. Yeah.
being disclosed. So it
Right.
really means that the difference. I think the difference between noisy OSINT and stealthy OSINT sometimes need
Mhm.
to have some type of at least operational integrity or centralization kind of control. And I
Right.
think when the public are doing it, it's not very stealthy, versus
Right.
when a designated agency, or let's say
Mhm.
members are kind of assigned to doing it, and they will, stealthy is the utmost importance on that. Sometimes it's the difference
Right.
between that.
Right. And it can also just be things that are they're hard to quantify, but like
Mm,
tasking, right? So if you
mm,
are, if you're in an agency and you're doing an operation, it's because you're trying to answer specific questions that have been given to you.
yep.
And those are questions that need to be addressed, right? Like someone has said, what is the tank output of this factory?
Hmm.
And what is the shell production, and then the logistics throughput for 1 month over these train lines. Just
Yep.
things that are important. But if you
Fuel,
you
fuel
know
supply, food provisions, a lot of those details
ex-
can make a very important kind of military decision sometimes.
right, and even stuff, like how full of how full are the hospitals, right? Is it did um did they do a campaign and now they have thousands of people have been injured, or and they're going to run out of beds and space, and so they're going to have to
Hmm.
stop because they just can't afford it anymore, or do they have so much extra space that they can keep going? All sorts of just things that don't necessarily occur to you as a civilian are important.
Hmm.
But say that you go into the places where that information is located and you get something else, like you collect all of the emails because maybe there's going to be something scandalous in the emails, and so when you
Hmm.
leak that, you've collected information that is not useful to addressing the questions that these people have. But worse, you have cut off any access that they would have had to the actual information that they need. So, and then this is an important thing, right? Is when someone is tasked with doing something, right? If you are an agency and your job is to read the emails of the Kremlin, right? That is your job, even if you get caught and you get kicked out. You still have to go back and read the emails, right? And there's only so many places you can read their emails, right? They don't have an infinite number of email servers. Yep. And so after a while, they're going to start getting a sense of what you're trying to do. And it becomes a lot harder for you to operate because they now know, well, if we think something's fishy, the first thing we need to do is check our email servers, because that is where we always get hit, right? And so
the central source, it's where everything is coordinated is definitely the top target.
Right. And so when when the people that you're targeting, when they start learning your tradecraft and your behaviors and your operational techniques and stuff, it becomes harder and harder. Like you either have to sort of retrain or you need to do other stuff. And there's a practical limit in that, you can change up your malware, you can get, new techniques and stuff, but you still have to hit the same email server, right? At some point, it's there's not much you can do. And so the difficulty here that I'm getting at is that if someone else who is not affiliated with any of these things comes in and starts poking about, and they do the same sort of attacks, they generate the same reaction on the other end. Like the targets start learning, these are things we need to worry about because this is what's interesting to people.
Yep.
So,
and this is very much, this is a history of what we've been doing in security all along for many years. It's looking for those indicators of compromise, and it's looking for those, techniques and the bulletins for AV was one of those things that was done for years, is looking basically at what files is changing, what's the process names, and then creating those bulletins to be updated so that the next time you're targeted, that you can prevent them. And it's to your point as well, is that when you've learned to trade a way of doing things, that's been very, very successful up until that point in time, and that's one of the things that we missed at the beginning. Is this is always continuous learning. We have to evolve every single time. So once you find that technique is no longer value anymore, you have to evolve it. You have to change it, and sometimes that might be bringing in new skill sets. Sometimes rotating the people.
Right.
I think that's why probably a lot of governments might be looking to outsource to cyber mercenaries or criminal gangs, because that's one way of changing the techniques and changing the way of doing things very quickly, rather than and rather than using your own direct people and resources.
Right, and it's cheaper in a way in that you don't pay procurement costs and you don't pay for the testing. You don't have to. You're just paying for an end product, and that's
paying for the result.
Cheap.
Yep.
Right, and if that doesn't succeed, then you don't, you probably pay something, but not as much. So there's all that, and then
I guess also as well as you could separate it across multiple different groups as well, so they don't even know what they're participating in as an entirety. They only know that they've got one specific thing that they're working on in a larger campaign, and that might then be rolled into other groups activities as well. So you can also limit the knowledge of those who are actually participating in it as well.
Yes, so like there's a security. There's some security risks of having outsiders, but then you can get security back by doing compartmentation and limiting people and other things. But so it's funny because there's sort of two sides of it. Like on the one side, like from a defender point of view, where we want to say, yes, you need to find and expose campaigns so that we can learn the tradecraft and we can cut off, we can stop them being able to use these things again. But then on the same defender side, it's when our like the guys doing stuff that we agree with, right? People doing counterterrorism and counter child sex abuse stuff. When they're doing operations, if we expose them, then they have the same costs that we try and impose on, the adversaries, right? So,
yep.
Attacking, exposing Russia is one thing, but exposing, like an FBI operation against child sex abuse stuff, that's something
human
else,
trafficking, right? And just tons of different other criminal. That's one of the things is that is there's so many different criminal activities in cyber. It's not just what's in the headlines today. There's a lot of nasty things that happens in the background that a lot of these criminal gangs are years. It could be years of work as well. And lots of different corporations. So.
And I think this is from the UK's cyber doctrine thing. One of the things that they bring up is that there's so much integration of cyber and digital stuff into everyday life that people doing criminal or terrorist or whatever activities that we do not like, they're going to have to use cyber, right? Like people are not. They're not sending letters to each other, like, dear sir, to whom it may concern. I am prepared to do drug deals with you. Let me know. It's like that doesn't happen, right? They're all doing things with computers, and that means that they are vulnerable to, offensive cyber operations, and those offensive cyber operations operate in the same way as all of them, the ones that we don't like and the ones that we support. And it's interesting. On the one hand, it's like, won't someone think of the cyber operators? And and on the other hand, it's like, you get people with these huge chip on the shoulder, like basically all hacking is bad. There's no.
That's a challenge.
That's a huge political.
It's a shame because hacking itself is a mindset. It's a curiosity, and unfortunately it's been put into from a media from a it's a criminal, it's a malicious person. But to be honest, majority of people I come across in the industry and in the world, they're people with good intentions and motivations, and and that's sometimes I always put context about ethical. It's the motives, it's the curiosity. Putting context around hackers is majority of them are good, and they're all trying to make the world a safer place, and they're all trying to do what they can to help, to make sure that a lot of organizations are protected, and that sometimes vulnerabilities need to be disclosed because the organizations are refusing to do the right thing. So and a lot of them put themselves at risk in doing so. I've got a question just to kind of sum it up and bring it to a close. Is that for those who's listening in and with OSINT and or might be looking into even involved in some of the types of operations, what type of advice would you give them? What would be a good place of resources to improve your OSINT skills? I know Bellingcat have the courses that they're doing these courses yearly that provide open source intelligence skills, which I think is fantastic. Is there any good resources that you go to that helps you that you'd recommend the audience to look into?
Basically, there's Hunchly. I don't know what the company is called because they've recently been acquired by someone, and so they're under a slightly different name now, I think. But they do training courses, and I think that a lot of the sort of tooling that you get is stuff that just take screenshots when you visit a website and keep a database of all the links that you've gone to, and then be able to search it. And it's really basic stuff, but when it's done well, it works excellently. And the people who are behind it are good people. So I guess that's what I'd recommend. There's also there's a new one, Vortimo. I'll send you a link so you can put it in the show notes.
If you send the links, I'll make sure we'll get them into the show notes so that it makes it easier for the audience. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's so the guy who invented Multigo. Again, it's another Ascent sort of
Multigo
tool.
is fantastic. It's the frames and the way, I sometimes find I get a little bit lost in it. And now, but the great thing is there's a lot of templates. There's a lot of also API integrations that can now expand the sources. But absolutely, once you get to know how it works and working with the frames and the templates. Is impressive.
Yeah, and you can enrich data and everything. It's great. So the guy who invented that, he's got a new product now that he does, Vortimo, and it's the same sort of thing. But when you browse, it does like all of this matching against stuff, and it extracts phone numbers and email addresses and URLs and all this, and then starts linking it together and creates like dossiers and all this stuff already. And it's kind of amazing for doing online research. Like it automates a huge amount.
Yeah, I think one of the more important things that you mentioned is taking notes, is just documentation. I think that's one of the most under kind of focused and prioritizing things that we can do. And for me, I'm always looking to improve my note taking. Always looking to improve how I document things. And I'm always taking, trying to, but I think that's one of the things that we can all probably do better at, and maybe learn from those who do it really well, is just documenting it so well that it's easy to search, easy to find, that you can, go back to what, even sometimes one of the things that, when I'm going through my notes, I do a lot of gamification sometimes, and I go back and I'm reviewing one of the boxes I did, or one of the CTFs, and I'm going, I wish I could capture my mind, what I was thinking at that point in time. That's the one thing I'm not very good at note taking, is what was my mind thinking when I actually went through that process.
When you sit there and you're like, okay, this is so obvious. All I need to do is put down this one word and it will trigger the entire, memory castle that I've got here. So you write down like, orange giraffe. And, that encapsulates everything. And you're looking at it and you're like, how could anyone not know what that means? And 6 hours later, you're looking at it, you're like, why the hell did this fucking idiot write down what was he thinking?
So that's where I wish there was a solution for now. So any of the audience is thinking about, I've seen, I think it was Graham Cludy was talking about one a while back, which was, I think it was Rewind, where it kind of records your screen activities. Okay. That's interesting, but I think if I can get where I was thinking about my mind, that would be a great note-taking tool. So, but absolutely, it's been fantastic having you on. This is really insightful, and I think for the audience, we haven't had a good OSINT episode to date. I'm talking about how governments are taking different approaches. So many thanks for being on the show, and it's been fantastic talking with you. And if you don't mind, we'll provide I think you're pretty easy findable on social media, so we'll kind of make if anyone has any questions and how to contact you. So any final words of wisdom you have for the audience?
Yeah, I guess the important thing is that Cybrary is so big that you could do whatever you find interesting, and it's bound to be within scope. I mean, that's sort of what I found is, over 25 years, I've changed careers a lot, and I'm still doing cyber because I love it.
It's a big field. I mean, I can't believe how much different rules and skill sets and where it's broken off into. Where I remember, it's like when just like when you're saying when you're back in the late 90s, and when I was starting, it wasn't even a field. It was something you did in addition to your day job. It was like I installed AV and I would deploy these machines while I was going and maybe training on Windows 95, rolling out some new teletyping application. It was something you did in addition, but now it's exploded into such a wild variety of skills and knowledge, which is amazing. So absolutely, this is an industry where even when we have a lot of automation coming in, that there is still a good amount of things that we can do that isn't automated yet.
Absolutely.
So again, many
Excellent talking
thanks.
to you.
It's
Thanks
been
for having me
fantastic,
on.
and it's been a pleasure. And all the best. And for everyone, again, this has been a great episode. Definitely tune in every 2 weeks for the 401 Access Denied podcast. And hopefully this has been valuable, and that you learned a lot from today's session. So again, many thanks to Grugq for being on, and you've been an awesome guest. And everyone, stay safe, take care. Thank you.